So last night here on Nightline, we brought you the ANC's stunning about turn on the issue of land expropriation without compensation. The party ditching a key clause in the proposed bill that it previously supported in Parliament. That clause, as it currently stands, gives the courts the power to decide on instances when no compensation should be paid. Now the ANC wants those powers given to the executive, led by the President and Cabinet. Now, we'll get your reaction from the Democratic Alliance Caucus Chairperson, Anli Lotrit, in just a moment. But I want us to begin by listening to what the Land Expropriation Ad Hoc Committee Chair and ANC member Matole Motshekga said in a conversation with my colleague Thulasizwe Simelane yesterday.
We have the experience that the court processes are arduous, they take time, they require resources, but the executive is a democratic government elected by the people of South Africa. They represent the people of South Africa, and they must govern, but we are not excluding the role of the courts, but we are not giving the courts the first opportunity to decide, because that will last another 25 years. And the people of South Africa cannot wait for another 25 years to get a resolution to this matter.
Well, in addition to that, there are concerns that not enough time has been granted for members of the public to give written submissions on the draft bill to amend Section 25 of the Constitution to allow for land to be expropriated without compensation. The ad hoc committee set the 31st of January as the deadline. For more on this, I'm joined by the DA's caucus chairperson in Parliament, Anli Lotrit. She's live in our Cape Town studios. Anli, a very good evening to you. Welcome to Nightline. So you would have heard there the ANC's Matole Motshekga saying that what they envision as the ANC is that clause changing to give the power to decide on instances where land is expropriated with zero compensation to the executive in the form of the President and indeed Cabinet. What is your reaction as the DA?
Well, first of all, that is totally unacceptable. We cannot have a situation where a president with a cabinet that is appointed at his behest makes decisions on something as important as expropriation. This is a constitutional matter, and Section 25 is part of the Bill of Rights, something that you don't just tamper with. So we are absolutely amazed and shocked that the ANC went so far as now to decide that a president or a minister can, in an arbitrary way, decide which land they're going to expropriate and under what conditions.
I don't know if you saw the full interview by my colleague Thulasizwe Simelane with Matole Motshekga, because further in their conversation, Dr. Motshekga was saying that what they are also thinking of doing now with this change, in fact, he was explaining their thoughts, saying what had happened was when in Parliament, when the draft bill that's out now for public comment was put together with a clause saying that the courts should decide on zero compensation, the ANC, in a sense, went along to get that process moving as quickly as possibly. Do you, as the DA, read that utterance from Motshekga as dishonesty from the ANC?
I think it is a matter that they're trying to take the attention away from the fact that for 25 years they have not made any progress. We have seen now in the past week the news that the large percentage, something like 70% plus, of farms in the hands of the state, and it hasn't been given to people. So the courts are not the problem, it's the government slowing down the processes. And by changing the Constitution, it's not going to improve the situation. And in fact, the Constitution in clause or section 36 makes it very clear that you can't just dispossess someone and take away the rights that is enshrined in the Bill of Rights. And one of the critical things is the right to property. Now, to leave that to a minister goes against the whole essence and core of the Constitution, and specifically one of your democratic rights, namely to own property.
But the ANC has always maintained that when land expropriation without compensation does eventually pass and become law, it would not be a wholesale grabbing of land, if you will, and that it would be done within the confines of the Constitution. It would be fair. So is it not alarmist then for you to suggest that by merely putting the powers to decide on zero compensation would mean the government would act unfairly against people?
There's an absolute possibility that that could happen. When one makes a law, and I'm not even talking about the Constitution, you don't make a law for a specific time for a specific minister. You always look at the future, that that piece of legislation could be in the hands of a different government at some point. So one has to be extremely careful in giving that kind of power to the executive. This is something that should be in the Constitution. It is in the Constitution. The Constitution says there must be a law of general applications and then sets the conditions to which that specific piece of legislation has to comply with. So I think this latest move is purely politically motivated.
And your opposition, others would argue, is also politically motivated because you have been against the amendment of the Constitution section to allow for land to be expropriated without land. The accusation, of course, levelled against your party, the DA, is that you are taking that position because you want to protect the minority white interest, despite the fact that there's a long history of dispossession on the part of black South Africans who so desperately need land, not only to earn a living, but also so they do have a place to stay.
I think that is a false argument. The Democratic Alliance has never been against land reform and land restitution. We've been saying that all along. But then it has to be done within the confines of the Constitution, and the Constitution makes ample provision for that. The main problem is that the government has not done its job. If you look at the kind of budget that they've allocated for land reform, it is not sufficient. The kind of assistance they've given to farmers to whom they have given land is not sufficient. So they're looking for the answer or the cause in the wrong place. And it's not by amending the Constitution, it is by getting their act in order.
So the public participation process is currently ongoing. We know the public hearings are underway. It's set to continue until sometime in March, as I understand it. When you look at the timetable now, do you think that by the end of this year, 2020, when Parliament is done with its work, land expropriation without compensation will indeed be law?
Well, it should be done with extreme circumspection. Now, the ad hoc committee's deadline is the 31st of March. Now, that also was decided. There's no specific reason why it should be the 31st of March. This is such an important issue that the time must be taken to do it thoroughly. And that is exactly what Dr. Moshecha said right at the beginning with our first meeting. That doesn't matter how long it takes, we have to do it thoroughly and properly. And that is what we ask for. I wrote to him on the 15th of January asking for an extension so that people have proper time, because it was the festive season, to actually submit their comments. Now, the public hearings have not yet started. It's only written comments at this point. But once again, you can't rush this process, and legislation has to take its proper course.
What will you do then in your opposition to the ANC's plans? Let me put it that way. Is there any other tool that's available to you at this point to stop this process going ahead as the majority party envisions?
Yes, there are different things that we are doing. We are, at this point, attending the committees. We are doing our oversight there. We are giving our comments there. We are pointing out what is wrong in the whole process and why the Constitution cannot be amended. But in the end, you always have legal recourse. So that is something that we are also looking at, and we will not support at any point, and we will do everything that is necessary to ensure that people, all South Africans, property rights are protected, as was the intention with the Constitution.
Annelie Lotriet, thank you so much for speaking to us. Annelie Lotriet, the DA Caucus Chairperson in Parliament, speaking to